Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the CMB Made Knives Devourer. Who is CMB Made Knives? They've been around for a little bit, not too long, still fairly new. These knives are manufactured in China, but if you're new, right? This is the super duper premium end of the Chinese made knives, not the junky stuff that you would find at the checkout counter at a gas station. Though, I think a lot of people would probably still label this as a gas station aesthetic, just to make sure and differentiate. This is made extremely well. It just kind of looks like that. Here's the certificate of authenticity. I'm going to point out a couple of things here. Number one, the designer, just wanted to let you guys know. I am not 100% sure how to pronounce his last name, but I still wanted to show the card. You might be looking here. Hardness 58 to 62. That's quite the range. And 58 is poo-poo town. I agree, but I got clarification on that. They make coated and uncoated versions of this knife. They wanted to include the entire range to accommodate for the fact that when they coat the blades, it drops the entire range by a point. So what they're saying is that their uncoated blades are the industry standard of 59 to 61. And they're, or maybe 59 to 62 or 60 to 62, something like that. They could be a little lower, right? And then their uncoated blades could be as soft as 58 to 60, probably. Number one, list those ranges differently. Number two, I don't like, personally, I would prefer that no M390 coated or uncoated drops below 60, and there are definitely ways for companies to manipulate this. We have a lot of companies, you know, kind of like, well, it gets a little lower there if it's coated, and it just depends on their own, you know, heat treatment protocols. Obviously, this comes down to preference. When it comes to M390, personally, I'll just give my opinion. I like to see it between 60 and 62. But just to clarify, there is a pretty good chance that if you pick up one of these blades uncoated, it will be on the upper end of this, which would make it anywhere from good to very good. So you just kind of have to make what you will of that information. Thank you to CMB Made Knives for sending this in. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex and on TikTok at the_metal_complex. I will link this knife down in the description so that you guys can check it out if you want to. Let me go ahead and get a measurement of this knife. Overall length, this is a pretty big boy. Coming in at, wow, almost 9 inches. I was, 8.85 inches. Wow. Blade length, 3.85. Cutting edge, almost 3.8. It's 3.75. Sorry. How about some size comparisons? Up against the Demco 8010 and the 8020.5. Any custom skills you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. Definitely longer than the 8010, not quite as robust, way longer than knives like the 8020.5. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Once again, it's huge. Finally, let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. All right, I think you guys kind of get the point. How's the action on this knife? This is a plunge lock, a button lock, but a standard plunge lock, right? Now, these locks don't tend to be the strongest locks in the world, but as long as you're using your knife like a knife and nothing else, you should be okay. It's strong enough and the geometry is good enough to survive a quick triple tap on this vinyl upholstery sitting on a plastic Home Depot table, but I wouldn't swing that thing very hard and expect it to hold up. As long as you're putting the pressure on this side, you're probably going to be okay. It seems like they did a pretty good job with this. Honestly, their lockup is pretty solid and there's no crunch or stick or anything like that. So yeah, I think they did a decent job with it. It's just not my favorite locking system, but boy, this definitely does operate super duper well. I'm trying to figure out my thumb. I felt like maybe I cut myself, but never mind. But the action on this is superb, and it's a combination of this weird stepped thumb ledge thing, but man, it works. It really catches your finger. Pushing that button, God, that is a guillotine. The action on this is crazy. There is something to be said about CMB Made Knives. Every knife that I've handled from them has been a little bit extra. It's felt a little bit more polished, a little bit more. It's either got some crazy feature or
the overall fit and finish just seems to be taken to that next level. And with this knife, it's not only the aesthetic, but specifically the feeling of that button lock. Good Lord, that is smooth. I mean, wowzers. That is crazy. Man, really, really nice there. So yeah, as awkward and crazy as this knife looks, it's actually really fun to manipulate and just beautifully simple. You can also use this fuller here to kick the blade. I guess that's what I'm going to call it, the fuller. So action good is what I'm saying, action good. Carry profile, thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a little bit thicker. Not much, but it's a little thicker. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Yeah, closed up, it's not quite as tall, but you're going to notice it. I mean, it's pretty long. It's longer than the Spyderco PM2. It's just a slight extra thickness and a slight extra heaviness because of the titanium. You're going to notice it unless you've been carrying other knives of similar size or larger. I know Cold Steel fans are on the edge of their seat waiting to tell us about their Espada. It's all right. You can calm down. The weight on this guy, what are we looking at for materials here? I'm pretty sure it says right there. Just really, really tiny. We have M390. I mean, you guys saw that, I guess, on the card. Then we have titanium. I think they listed as TC4. What is TC4? TC4 is Chinese grade 2 titanium, which for the longest time I assumed was different than 6AL4V, which is grade 5 US titanium. It turns out, nope, it's literally exactly, I think it's almost exactly the same thing. They just call it something different over there, right? But it's titanium. It's the same stuff that we use on our knives over here. So, and the same stuff that I think pretty much everybody uses. So we have titanium, heavily milled out on the outside and inside for weight reduction. We have an M390 blade, and we have titanium backspacer, titanium pocket clip. The weight on this 8.85 inch knife comes in at not crazy, 4.55 ounces. Pretty good. And the balance on this is just right about where you're going to put your index finger. Pretty good. It honestly feels a lot lighter than you would expect. Boy, that action is just absolutely insane. So yeah, not an incredibly heavy knife for the size. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. I have a whole bunch of my hardware just sitting out here. But I think what's in here right now is the is it the T8? Yeah. Let's go ahead and check that pivot screw. The pivot screw is definitely a T8, and then they have adjustment heads on both sides. We have T8 body screws and just 2 on each side. Should be pretty easy to take apart. As long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Let's measure the blade stock thickness, and then we can move on with the rest of the video. Did I actually put my calipers? Oh no, there they are, right there. Blade stock thickness on this guy coming in at, come on now, there we go. Coming in at about 148 thousandths on the thicker side, but not insane. Okay, meat and potatoes. What a crazy looking knife. A lot of people are going to look at this and think it's cool, and a lot of people are going to look at it and say it looks like something that was fired at, with a machine gun. It all comes down to preference, right? The aesthetic, whether it looks good or bad, it's very subjective. Personally, it's kind of a little bit too much for me. But what I love about it, what gets me to ignore that weird aesthetic, is the action. It's just, that's the part that puts a smile on my face. The other thing that puts a smile on my face is the blade. I like the blade a lot more than the handle. It is very cool. It is very unique. I don't like this right here. I wish that was way smaller or not even there at all, right? We have the designer logo. We have the CMB Made Knives logo, and then we have the steel on there. That's it. But there's a lot of extra work, and look at all these little tiny details. This is wild. So a lot of people, if you're new, let me give you some advice. When it comes down to judging things and judging their price, this is a mistake that some people make, a full decade into being a knife enthusiast. And what they're doing is they are robbing themselves of experiences that could put a huge smile on their face. But they can't, because they have this mental blockade, and that mental blockade is the knife's value comes down to the materials alone and nothing else. And some people won't admit that they do that, but they definitely do. So they judge it based on what it's made out of. Titanium and M390. Titanium and M390 knives, I've seen them as low as this price, so anything more than that is overpriced. It's not a good way to look at it. In some cases, there are things that are overpriced, and they're this material, that material, they have this element. What I'm trying to say is, it's much broader than that. It's much more complicated than that. When things have more complexity, right? When there's more work involved, even just more milling, it will factually add, I wouldn't say value, it will add to the final price tag, right? But for people like me, those elements are really cool. Not always, right? But it depends on your aesthetic taste. Like for some people, I think you could say, okay, I recognize that this has, more complexity in it than the average titanium and M390 folding knife. But the final outcome of those complexities is not something that appeals to me aesthetically. Fine, but at least it's acknowledgement that there is extra work in it, right? That means that at some point, given enough knives, you'll find something that has those elements and that you like and that will be worth that extra money, right? So keep an open mind. If you're new, just understand, you're right. Sometimes it's more convenient to kind of paint it black and white and just be like, this is how I perceive the entire spectrum. It's just not that simple. But to get back to the review, I do appreciate the little elements here. I think the blade's really interesting. It does, I guess, kind of go. I just find the handle scales to be a little bit more chaotic and the blade to be a lot more flowy and interesting. It's really cool. At its core, I guess you could call this kind of maybe a reverse tanto. I guess, right? Call it whatever you want. Behind the edge, it's sort of medium. It's not going to be like, oh my gosh, laser beam. But they did a good job sharpening it from the factory. It's very sharp, very sticky edge, right? Good geometry for just general day-to-day stuff. It's got a little bit of a tip. Symmetry's great. I mean, as far as like, does the front look like the back? Yes. And the cutting bevel is absolutely perfect. Very precision. The milling on the scales is also very precision, a little bit sharp in some areas. Not so much that it really bothers me. I do like that they polished these little bowls in here around and like these areas right here where they milled this out. But we have like 3 different layers here. You have the top layer and then there's a step and then you've got the bevels and this area right here and then the bevels is pretty intense. Like there's a lot going on here, right? And, you'll get the guys who are like, I'm a machinist and it's not that expensive. It's just such a nothing statement. It is pricey. The machines, even if we're talking about Chinese manufacturing, the machines required to mill titanium, to do it at this level of complexity, right? This much work, right? It does eat up bits. It is expensive. The maintenance, right? I mean, the business has to consider all of these costs. I'm not necessarily trying to like bolster up the price of this because I don't absolutely love the final price tag, but I can kind of see why this knife is a little bit more expensive than a lot of its competition, right? We still have to recognize that this is going to be much more expensive than just a plain flat rectangle of titanium with no detail in it. This obviously has more work in it, right? And when more work is in something, it's going to cost more money, right? Even if you don't like how it looks, it's still going to cost more money. So I do appreciate it in that way. But admittedly, this isn't an aesthetic that I enjoy. But it's fine, right? They definitely did a good job with it, right? Even if the final outcome isn't something that I love to look at, it's very precision. The backspacer is interesting. We have these little holes here that these are so wide they actually carved into the liner to accommodate for them, and then they slowly get smaller to the point where it's only at the front of the backspacer. So this is a very designy knife, and when you have a designy knife, they inevitably cater to a few, and most people don't. Like when you have a knife that is super duper designy, it is intentionally made for only a few people. And the vast majority of people will probably not very much enjoy it, right? So just respecting the designer, I understand that, right? It's the more complicated you make something, the less appealing it is, to a large audience. But I think they were well aware of that. You have a lanyard bar back here, which is fine. You have a pocket clip that is just as chaotic as the rest of the knife. I do like that it fits into this area right here where they've milled that out. That's really pleasing to the eye. I guess I do like that area. In and out of the pocket, it's not bad. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's a smooth surface for it to ride on. It's got a nice ramp there. I do love all the extra work. I mean, the pocket clip itself is very complicated. They did not There's no part of this knife that they, looked at and they were like, yeah, just leave that normal. Like, no, they really, really worked on every last little part of this knife. They even did that thing where they highlight the centering with that little U-shaped sort of backspacer there. Sorry, I should let you guys see it without my fingers on the blade. I had my fingers on there, so it looks like it's actually... Am I tricking myself? It looks like it's centered. Maybe slightly off to the right. Usually that's a turn of the pivot there. But they highlight that area to make it like, really, really obvious when the blade is centered. So pretty cool, right? We have the stop pin located back here. There's two of them. There's a closed position stop pin and an open position stop pin. This one has incredibly deep shouldering. Look how deep that is in there. Man, wow. These are not stops. It's just the stop pin. But, super duper smooth. We didn't cover the fact that there's no lefty mounting position. And also the carry depth is curiously more shallow than you'd expect because of where that pocket clip ends, right? Would have preferred it a little bit deeper, but this isn't bad. There's not much sticking out of your pocket, right? I also like that the pocket clip is only 50% the length of the handle. This is another thing we didn't talk about, and that's ergonomics. It looks, at first glance, uncomfortable. And then at just moments, microseconds after that, you go, well, actually, it's probably pretty comfortable because it looks like a pretty straightforward ergonomic shape. And then you handle it and you think, you kind of land somewhere in between. Like, yeah, it works with your hands, but some of these ledges are very abrupt. So it's okay. I'm not going to call it comfortable. This is the type of knife that if I had to use it longer than if I had to cut for longer than 30 seconds with it, it probably would start to bother my hand a little bit. So I wish some of these areas were knocked down a little bit more, but they're not bad. The pocket clip doesn't bother me too much, but I'm definitely aware that it's there. Probably the most comfortable position to hold this knife in is choked up, just like this. But I just about disengaged it. When you choke up, the position of this button is right where your index finger naturally lands, which is not usually the case on these types of knives. And CMB, I think you guys maybe messed up just a little bit. We probably shouldn't have had a choke up position because when you do this, look where your index finger lands. Right on top of that button. You squeeze this and guess what happens? It disengages. You don't want that. Left-handed people, when you choke up on it, same thing. And it's a little bit harder, but you can definitely, if you squeeze in exactly the right spot, you're putting pressure on this button. And I'm unable to do it. I have to really, really try, admittedly, but you can do it. So the most comfortable position to hold this knife in is also the least safe, right? I don't know how often you're going to need to do that, but I really wish that that button was in a different spot. Overall, and by the way, there's no blade play up, down, left to right, no lock stick, no pivot lash. Just unbelievably smooth, right? Nice detent considering it's a plunge lock, right? It's okay. And then it appears to be slightly off center, but again, that could just be a turn of a pivot. This is definitely precision machined. The action is, wild, man. Absolutely wild. Love the finish on the blade. It's got a lot of character. It's not a knife that you easily forget. I don't like the position of the button. I don't like how easily it disengages. Also, the final price tag is okay. It's $298. This is definitely, like if somebody off the street came up to me and said, this knife should be priced the same way as the other premium Chinese knives, like $180 to $220, I would say no. This obviously has more work in it, right? $275 I think would have been a little bit more fair. $298, right? You get up there at $300 or especially over, and it's like, eh. The other thing is separate your HRC ranges. Give a specific HRC range for your your coated blades, and give a different HRC range for the uncoated blades. And also, 58 is, whether it's coated or not, 58 is definitely too low. 59 is too low, and somehow people have just kind of accepted it. But in my opinion, it is simply too low. So I would prefer to see 60 to 62. That's just my opinion, right? But little things here and there. I have a lot of faith that the CMB Made Knife Company will release some pretty awesome stuff in the future. There's some implications here that they know what they're doing and they're interested in making pocket knives for pocket knife people, and that they themselves are pocket knife people. I've definitely checked out a lot of knives from companies who are like, oh, people like pocket knives? Well, we've used these machines to make other things, but we'll just try and bang out a pocket knife real quick. And then they market it as a minimalist aesthetic because they didn't really know what they were doing. There's a lot of companies doing that, right? They're basically non-pocket knife companies making pocket knives and just sort of cashing in on this booming interest in the knife industry. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because CMB Made Knives is clearly not one of those companies. These are pocket knife people. These are people who care. Even if there's some quirkiness or there's some weird design issues, this could only have ever been designed by somebody who was a pocket knife person and OEM'd by a company who really cares about tolerances. Again, that's the button could be in a different place, but God, that action, man. And the sharpening, like the edge, is really, really great. While their HRC range could be better, they're still, I think they're still trying. So I feel like CMB Made Knives is going to make some pretty cool stuff. So it's obviously not going to be for everybody. This is one of those knives that's just like you only buy it if you really, really love how it looks and you can choke down some of those things that I pointed out there. But I think if you really like how this looks and you go ahead and buy it, I think you're going to be happy with it. But if you're kind of on the fence and you're like, oh, and then there's a million other things out there that are probably better suited for you at the same price point or even a little bit less. So, that's I think those are my complete thoughts there. That's going to be pretty much it today, guys. Thanks again to CMB Made Knives for sending this in. I will link this knife down in the description so you guys can check it out. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex and on TikTok at _metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.